we are now going on, finally, to René, who will educate us about sauropod phylogeny and Gatling guns.
To be fair, the Gatling gun has nothing to do with my talk, but I cannot share my screen somehow.
Oh, are we over 50 people again? I think we might be.
So, yeah, it looks like I'm gonna have to start chopping some heads. All right, who wants to go first?
I'm very sorry.
Okay.
Guys, if you have Nitro, you can help us by giving the server a boost, so up to 120 people can be on a stage.
Yeah, so boost the server, please. Question: can you guys hear me loud and clearly, or enough to be audible? Good, and you can see now my presentation with the so-called miniguns. Wonderful.
Yes.
To be fair, when I designed this image, I had too much time. I was not aware that the trailer for Sauria came online today. Nevertheless, I would like to quickly start with my presentation to be just in time. And yeah, sorry for that long title. It inspired me also for this artwork. And quick introduction to myself. I am someone who studied geosciences and paleontology, so somehow you could call me a professional, but at this mere moment, I am more of a scientific volunteer in the section of the education. And as I noted down already, it's a job getting paid for telling kids about dinosaurs and everything. And I have to admit to Akeru that psychom and storytelling is often very much connected to each other. This is experiences that I also witness when telling kids dinosaurs are awesome and birds are dinosaurs and seeing their shocked reaction. But for today, or for this special event, I would like to talk about sauropod dinosaurs. That was my master's topic. That is something I would like to continue to work on. And most of the time I work with diplodocoids, the group of a family that includes the famous Brontosaurus, Cartidocus, Gallimiopus, and other critters. And also, the problem is when I'm too specialized to say anything regarding museum visits for a brachiosaur or a mamenchisaurus. So I would like to ask you to post maybe your story with a sauropod that you saw in a museum, maybe, with the hashtag PaleostreamCon. I think that's the easiest way. And another thing that I did and I love to do, basically, is phylogenetic research. This huge discipline that tries to give us an understanding of how animals are related to each other. And this is basically founded by the research of Willie Hennings. He was a German taxonomist working on insects. So keep in mind that this person had a lot of experience with insects, and his knowledge basically swapped the entire understanding of cladistic analyses. You might want to ask me in the end or in between this talk, why should we actually care about phylogenetic research in sauropod dinosaurs? I can answer that really quickly with 3 points. First and foremost, as you can see, Luigi Gasquel, a very famous Twitter critter, posted some very funny memes, and the more you are into phylogenies, the funnier it actually gets. This is something you can have your giggles about, and it's nice to laugh at some topics in the end. On the other hand, you have some serious topics like taxonomic dumping, something that our Wikipedia editors also face sometimes. And when it comes to real publications, we have to point out your criticism, which the people from the Sauropod Vertebra Picture of the Week blog did. So, by the way, Mike, Matthew, Darren, thank you for this late birthday present. They posted it on my birthday. And another thing that my mentor Emanuel Schopp became famous for was establishing Brontosaurus. This is a result of new approaches in phylogenetic research. So there are good points why we should test and, I don't know, develop new methods in phylogeny, because this is a more recent method to use and still under developing. And like in cooking, you have two large problems with phylogenetic research. One is your sampling and two is your methods. Let's make a parallel with cooking. You can have the best potatoes or meat around the planet, but if you cannot cook them properly, you end up in a mess. And I would like to go into detail with those two problems, in quotation marks, and discuss with you some aspects of those things. Hopefully encouraging you to read more phylogenetic papers or maybe discuss about phylogenetic methods in the end. First of all, our samplings. Sauropods in general are very rare, completely preserved. If you find a complete sauropod, do not buy a lottery ticket, just continue digging sauropods. And the more complete sauropods we get, the more complete our understanding can actually become. Sometimes we have actually diplodocytes with skin preservation. Sometimes we have only a skull of a dinosaur. Sometimes we even have lefts, and people try to make a new taxon out of it. And this is also becoming a problem for the methods later on. But first and foremost, we have to ask another question. Where was this material found? What is the geology behind of this? Because we could always argue, well, it's part of Upper Jurassic. Yes, but which Upper Jurassic? This is something that people forget, that in every time step there are millions of years included. So it's obviously important to understand where the stuff is coming from, what is the context behind of it, and also what files can we use. This is one of the more famous bone digging maps by the Saurier Museum Ahrtal, one of the best museums I visited so far, and they provide pretty good maps, and this is important for us, especially in one aspect which I also hinted at, which is the idea that was also picked up by Darren Naish, that there might be too many sauropod dinosaurs from the Morrison Formation. Some studies, including Woodruff et al. And Woodruff and Fowler, try to make a larger understanding of sauropod ontogeny in saying, for instance, like in Nanotyrannus and Tyrannosaurs, that some dinosaurs that we face are just an ontogenetic stage of a currently known or well-established known sauropod dinosaur. But Darren points out at some point that first and foremost, we have 7 million years of Morrison Formation to cover. We have a large diversity going on, and we have to still study everything, including not sauropod stuff, including the geology, including the stratigraphy. And just to point out an example, we have 2 species of Diplodocus right now running around since Chop et al. 2015. They come from different quarries. They might actually be from different time sets, maybe with a short gap, maybe with a long gap, who knows? But we need further research to give a proper statement on that. And then, of course, as Vidax and others pointed out already, what kind of sources do you already have? What is the material in other specimens known for? How good is it described? On one hand, you can say, well, I can just describe it properly, but the problem then is your time. Time is sometimes money, and good luck getting the funding of that. And it's very handy if you get really large, simply concepted Excel sheets like for Morrison Formation sauropods. If you have the time, you can just do it with other clades or other groups of animals or plants even. This is something also to consider when you start your studying. And then the question is, how is the material preparated? How is it showcased, for instance? I picked up these 2 examples from an older exhibition. It is now gone. And I would like to point out my arguments why the cervical vertebra, I think, is easier to study than this mounted skeleton. Obviously, and not in the good views of some museum visitors, you can easily touch or study this vertebra. You can go into more detail without using more gadgets or more material. And in this mounted skeleton, it's obviously pretty more neat to see. You can have a more detailed imagination of how the animal can look like, especially for paleo artists. But the problem is the detail you need to study the phylogenetic relationships can actually be gone at this point. And also keep in mind, there's a lot of time and effort put in those skeletal mounts. So don't mess around with preparators when you ask them to just basically demount the entire skeleton because you want to test a relationship between 2 dinosaurs. And then there's this issue. I'm bringing this up again because I worked at my master's thesis on a juvenile sauropod and the ontogeny of it. And there is definitely very much to do in sauropod ontogeny. Basically, in every dinosaur ontogeny, there are some progresses in heterosaurs, for instance. But in sauropods, it's a weird mixed bag. This is on the right, for instance, a larger summary from Matteo Fabri and colleagues, which shows us that the skull of a sauropod going through ontogeny is pretty insane, like this more greenish coloration, the maxilla and premaxilla regions here, the reddish and green one, are changing drastically from this chicken-like looking hatchling to this sauropod dinosaur, which we know as a titanosaur. We also see this in other clades as well, like in diplodocoids. And this is messing up a lot with taxonomy because obviously we only have the bones. We don't have the advantage of genome. You can also do genetic phylogenetic analyses, which was also pretty handy with the whale evolution, but obviously in sauropods it's not working. And here are 2 examples that are a bit more vague to really assign to a taxon. On the left, we have a beautifully preserved sauropod skull, isolated from everything else, described by John Whitlock and colleagues, and it's assigned to Diplodocus sp, but some consider also it to be Barosaurus. And on the middle stage, we have baby Tony. It's a sauropod dinosaur, pretty well preserved in the postcranial section, but no skull. And that is the issue, because without a skull, we could not say any further back then what this dinosaur actually is. Back then, when it was described by Daniela Schwarz and colleagues, it was assigned to a Diplodocene, but then later on got revisited and it became a baby brachiosaur, or brachiosaurid-like, because the problem is, if we have a juvenile or a baby this size, it's maybe 2 or 3 meters long, comparing it to the big dinosaurs that we also see in Berlin, for instance, there are some larger gaps to fill in and we need the material from it. Maybe it's housed in some museums, maybe it needs to be dug up at some point. And then we have the methods, basically how to cook your meat, how to cook your dinosaur. Let's put a hypothetical experiment in here. We have this sauropod skull with some cervical vertebrae, and you have some ideas what this dinosaur might be. You could just say now, well, I assume that this is a diplodocid, so I use the most recent phylogenetic dataset for diplodocids and see if this is in the groups or not. On the other hand, you could say, well, what if it's actually a dicreosaurid and I have to change some scores when other people scored it in a different way? That is also something that we need to do in phylogenetic analysis, sometimes revisit the material that was already established. And for dicreosaurid, I would use the Whitlock and Wilson Mantilla research from 3 years already. And if it's saying it's a titanosaur, probably I would use another matrix. And if I would say it's a eusauropod, I would use a different matrices. So you see, depending on your idea, you automatically use a different phylogeny than others might do, which is kind of obvious, but important to point out, especially when you're working with other groups of dinosaurs or other groups of extinct animals in general. And then you come up to this problem, not a general problem, but it was for me a problem to think about. Would I rather use a species level or a specimen level analysis? The main difference is basically if you have a species level analysis, you can just summarize everything known from the species based on all the specimens known and create your operational taxonomic unit, which we just call an OTU. The advantage is you can just fill in the blanks with a skull that is assigned to Apatosaurus, for instance, and it has cervical vertebrae. We know cervical vertebrae from a different apatosaur, so we can draw some parallels and create composite models, which is all right to use. But we always have to consider there might be interspecific and intraspecific variation, and as well as ontogeny. And some studies also think there might be actually sexual dimorphism in dinosaurs, and especially in sauropod dinosaurs. Specimen level analysis just ignores that and just uses the one specimen as its own operational unit. The advantage is you get a larger data set, and the bigger your data set becomes, it can be more transparent with your results. On the other hand, you have some problems with taxonomic assignments because the skull you earlier assigned to Apatosaurus might actually be something else. What if the isolated skull that I showed you in the beginning of the reconstructed Brontosaurus is actually a different Apatosaurus? So these taxonomic assignments can become a problem. And of course, there's also the time problem because some people just did not score specimens that become or might become interesting for your study. And this is something that we in classistic analysis always face and think of all the specimens that are not described yet to come up. And just small hints, yeah, there are also some interesting Morrison sauropods papers coming up. And then we have this term, constraint searches. Whenever you read the terms in the discussion forcing Galeomopus into a clade of what and where, it uses basically the assumption that we assign a group of OTUs to one clade to several branches belonging together. The problem that I just used hypothetically in this meme is, again, with the specimens, what if the isolated skull or the half-bitten femur is another dinosaur that it's, not fitting with what we know about so far? And the problem then is, again, if you really rely on all these insecurities or if you want to cut them out. And the problem in general is when you just add one OTU, you can basically redesign your entire tree structure. But we come to that point in my comments later on, which are appearing now. If you are interested in doing phylogenetic research or doing phylogenetic research, first and foremost, use the problems you are most comfortable with. Like, I prefer TNT, 1.5 knot taxon limit, and mesquite. Other people use, for instance, pulp. Because they love pulp, I don't like pulp, I use mesquite and TNT, as I said. And basically, every phylogenetic tree is one hypothesis. You can be wrong, you can be right, and it's not a mistake to ask other scientists who work on similar stuff for advice or some inspiring ideas. In fact, scientific communication is sometimes a really big key factor. And just one thing clear, because it happened also to me at several points, sometimes your scoring is wrong, not because you just think, well, the femur does look more like this and that, just because you remember it from another study. Sometimes you just put the numbers wrong. So it's okay if you just check your numbers again, check every character and state again, and take your time with it. My longest run for a phylogenetic analysis under a constraint search was 9 hours long. So in the meantime, I went actually sleeping and wake up at 2 a.m. and again just to see what the tree was producing. Spoilers alert, it was absolutely bonkers and no sense at all. So take your time and be patient with the programs. And as I said already, tree structures can change a lot with new added OTUs. I remember, for instance, that this big clade, Flagellicaudata called, was established when Suasea entered the public research or was described. And before that, there was no new group or whatsoever. And this can happen also to your analyses. And if you are doing it right and find enough of arguments, you can just do it the same as Emanuel Schopp did with Brontosaurus. You can establish older taxa again. You can just give new taxa a reason to exist, like Galeomopus. And one big hint at every study you want to do, phylogenies are always one part of a story. It needs osteological description. It needs the comparison outside of just the numbers and the trees you generate. With that said, this is my reference list for tonight or today, whatever time you are joining us. And I have to thank you for your attention. And I have to thank so many people who helped me to get into this cladistic analysis, including Dr. Emanuel Schopp. Emanuel, if you see this, hi. And for the rest of you, I'm very open for some questions and some comments. Thank you very much.
Loud clapping noises, applause, applause, applause. Thank you very much, René. You are perfectly on time. We have 5 minutes for questions, if there are any in chat already. Otherwise, I also have a question, but let's first see what other people have to say.
There's from Akira a nice question. What's your least favorite sauropod specimen? This is a running gig basically when you work with the Schopp et al. Analysis. There's this dinosaur or specimen called Diplodocus lacustris. It's basically cut off whenever you create a reduced consensus tree because it's just teeth. So whenever you run the analysis, you can just basically say, yeah, just cut off Diplodocus lacustris because it's just teeth. But yeah, it's really different to say. Otherwise, I have no larger concerns with specimens. All you need to do is just be careful with your scoring. If you score something new or if you copy and paste some scorings, just revisit them. Vidax asks how many characters do you use for sauropods? It depends. Like recent diplodocyte matrices have, for instance, 498. I have to check with titanosaurs again, but I know they're not that much as in theropods. I think theropods sometimes uses 1,000 characters, which is insane. Which also leads me to the question by Vazi. No, I'm not going into titanosaur phylogeny because one, so far the big titanosaurs are always fragmentary and only known by at least one half specimen. So until we have more complete described titanosaurs, I would not try it. Like, there are some brave souls who actually do analyses on titanosaurs, and I have a lot of respect for them, but I could not do it. I would go insane on that. I have actually no favorite sauropod species. Ecofurry asked that. Below, I have actually not a favorite Germany Natural History Museum. I need to go to Berlin, for instance, to give a clear judgment. And Tim asks, how would you advise going about the creation of a phylogeny on a group of animals, and where would you get the characters if you don't have access to the specimens? That's a difficult question, but just quickly said, the characters, you can just also create your own characters. Chop et al. Also created new characters that is also listed in their 300 pages or so long PDF. And basically, if you go with a phylogeny, first and foremost, check how many specimens are already described. Check how many specimens are accessible to you, like also in SciComm ways, like just ask the people working in a museum, can you provide me with pictures of a dinosaur or of a skeleton you have? And if they do that, you can just also try to learn that, basically. But on the other hand, it's always easier to just visit them and also give some consulting voices to other people who are doing the phylogenies on that. And I think, yeah, any tips for beginners? Basically, any tips for beginners, there are some larger books basically dealing with the idea of phylogenies. You can just read them at the beginning. But if you just want to start directly with program, take a phylogeny, like from a supplement data, download it, and just experiment a bit, like create your own OTU and say, yeah, this could be, I don't know, the big sauropod that might be either Supersaurus or Barosaurus. Just score what you feel like you want to do and see how is it going. Programs like TNT are just relying on routine, and the better you are with your routine, the faster you become actually and get more understanding. Do I have still time for questions? Because
you have 1 minute in theory.
Okay, because one question I would like to answer directly is by UComp. Tips for getting into master's programs for this topic. Basically, what I did was having luck because University of Bonn established this paleontology Master of Science, and it was based on geosciences, but you also could just check for biology courses or programs. Like, of course, you can also enter paleontology when you have a biology degree. And just see if people are offering labs or programs for teaching you how to work with phylogenies. That's the best advice I can just give you. Yeah, I think the rest I can just answer while the other talks are running.
Yeah, exactly. For people who didn't notice yet, we have here our forum on Discord. So if you have still questions, the presenters are still here and can answer them. I just see here Akio, for example, is just answering a question down here in his thread. But this leads us to our next point on the schedule,